Hello, it's Wren and welcome to my studio. Well, I've been working on a beautiful painting of an Eastern rosella and I absolutely love this painting, and I have to thank John, who I met via Twitter, and he has allowed me to use his photograph. So there'll be a link to his Twitter link in the comments too. And I have just loved this painting. My own pear tree was in flower, which allowed me to reference the actual live flower as well as his photograph when I worked on the painting. And I'll go into how I've worked on the colourings and also the glazing and the final composition details. Now, some of the things that I've been doing in this month, I've had a lot of help in, and I do mean a lot of help from other people, and I've basically laid out my studio, taken more space, and I've got a separate area for each of the art mediums that I work with, because you probably know, if you've followed me, I've been a professional artist for something like 65 or more years. I taught art for 45 years, 48 years now, with teaching online. And, well, I have a lot of art materials, and it's helpful to have one area delegated for oil paints, one for the watercolours, one for the gouache, one for the inks, you know it. So we've got a lot of separate areas all laid out now, and I have the one corner I work in, which has got a beautiful reclining armchair, beautiful daylight globes, everything set up, and my camera, and that's where I take all my work from the medium that I'm working in across to that area on a trolley, and I can sit in comfort either with daylight or the artificial daylight globes and do my actual demonstration work for you. And I'm just loving it. Going through the process of how I've created this painting of the Eastern rosella, I began with a stretched canvas, gallery wrapped canvas, that's about 1/3 of a metre square. And I've used artist quality structure formula acrylics, and I've applied them in much the same brushstroke technique as I would use if I was painting with oil paints. If I was younger and had more stamina to paint for longer sessions, I definitely would have chosen to use oil paint for this painting, but I like to work wet into wet, which would have meant that I'd have worked for about 10 to 16 hours a day, probably for about 3 days, and completed the painting while the paint was all wet. Because I need to take shorter painting sessions now, I've worked in acrylic paints, which has allowed me to do a good job by just doing short sessions several times a day, perhaps for over a longer period of time. And I've got this painting to a point where I basically copied the photograph to begin with. After I'd copied the photograph, I then assessed it for the composition, and I knew that I wanted to diffuse the background. I wanted to make the background look deeper. I wanted to soften the blossoms at the back of the painting. When I say the back of the painting, at the back of the main focal point of the painting, which is the Eastern rosella. And that's what I've glazed this painting. I've also glazed the foreground, the blossoms in the foreground, because I could go back and detail again on top of them if I wanted to bring any of those forward. But my main point was to try to get the dramatic attention onto the rosella. The major work that I have done is to soften the white blossom that was directly behind the rosella's head. Now, the rosella's head is red. Now, the opposite to red is green. So I've muted that white blossom behind the rosella's head with a muted green, and that has pushed that blossom further back and slightly out of focus so that you would focus more on the rosella's head. Then I'm coming in now, and the beak, the rosella, I've actually put more sunlight or light onto that rosella's beak and brightened it to bring it further forward. And there's a blossom off to the side of it, which I felt was attracting the eye, and so I've also muted that blossom. So the majority of my work has been in pushing the background back and bringing the rosella more into focus. So that was the major work that I have done that's been any different at all to the photograph. The photograph was just so excellent. John, who is the photographer, I couldn't have improved on his composition. As I said, other than those artistic things of actually doing a painting where the brush strokes are visible so that you can see that it is the painting, not the photograph, because I'm not into photorealism. I like to see that the artist has done the work. And then I've glazed it, and then I've come back in and I've done some of those extra softening of the backgrounds where it needed to be done, and a little bit of catch light along the top edge of the rosella, just a little bit of perhaps lemon yellow and white, just to give it a bit of a catch light line, and bringing that beak, I get a bit of one myself, highlight on it, and also the rosella's claw. There wasn't a lot of difference between the claw and the branches, and so I put a little bit of a catch light on the claw, trying to make it stand out separate to the branches, a little bit more focus of light and shade on the claw. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with it, but a lot of that comes from having had an excellent subject to paint in the first place. Really, to me, that's always been what makes an award-winning painting. Is it's not just having the painting technique, it's having a beautiful subject. And thank you again, John. I'm absolutely wrapped in having had the opportunity to paint this beautiful subject that you photographed. And there's more to come. To give you more value, I'll now show you how I glazed and detailed the acrylic painting of the wallaby. I'll talk you through the stages of the painting. I began in the same way as I did with the rosella painting, of painting a detailed painting, not a complete copy of the photograph, because I made the background simpler and I also added water, which wasn't in the photograph. But I painted the wallaby first of all on canvas. In this case, I left the stretching of the canvas to be done after the painting was finished. You can paint on canvas, either just the sheet canvas or stretch canvas. Now I'm mixing orange, cadmium orange, with a glazing medium. And I'm just painting it on very thinly. What I'm wanting to do is, again, to push the back area of this painting further back into distance. The Australian wildlife is mostly nocturnal, and I want to give this scene a feeling of evening or nighttime. I'm also putting the glaze over the back of the wallaby because the wallaby's coming towards you, and I want the tail to look like it's receding further back than the head. So I'm working always, when I'm doing a painting, on the aerial perspective, the feeling of the layers of air that give the painting depth. I want people to feel like they could plunge their hand into a painting. Claude Monet's beautiful impressionistic paintings, he was a master of getting that feeling of the depth into a painting. If you look at his water lily paintings, not the photographs, not the prints, but the real painting, if you ever get an opportunity to see those big paintings from across the room, you do feel as if you could plunge your hand into that pool. And so that's what I'm striving to do. The artist is always striving to do the impossible, and we're wanting to get a three-dimension into this two-dimension painting. Now here I actually throw my orange on, too bright. Easy, wipe it off. That's the beauty actually of working with acrylic paint over the oil. It is easy to wipe it off. The orange will not be staying bright orange like that. I am layering this in glazes. So I'm starting off with the cadmium orange. I will mute that by putting the opposite with it shortly, and that of course will be blue. Each time I go in, I mix a bit of the paint with the glazing medium. I may or may not put a bit of white with it. If you are working with an oil painting, you need to follow the rules of fat over lean, thick over thin. And if you are putting a glaze down, add a little bit of titanium white with that glaze. The reason being is titanium white is one of the colours least likely to crack. Your darker colours are the most likely to crack. So for instance, if you were glazing a thin layer of a dark paint on an oil painting, you're going to end up with a painting that probably cracks within 6 months. Um, Paint chemistry is something that's not often taught here on YouTube. The rules are there for your benefit. They're there to help you be able to create an archival quality painting. I'm working with the best quality, artist quality acrylic paints. This particular brand I'm using for this painting is all the Winsor & Newton artist quality. In the previous painting I did, the Rosella one, I also used some of the Matisse, which is another high quality, provided, of course, you get the artist quality and not the student grade. Most companies will put out a student grade and an artist quality. So do check with your paint distributor. Make sure they're knowledgeable and not just salespeople wanting to sell a product. And make sure you get the best quality if you're wanting to do the best quality work. Do you see this grey I'm producing? It's a lovely muted grey, but it's not a cold grey like you would get if you would just use black. I'm using blue and orange. It's producing varying degrees from muted apricots through to muted blues through to what you might call a tan colour. But there's luminosity to it because it's not fully mixed. I'm going into varying tints of this glaze and varying tones or light and shade of this glaze. Remembering I'm after trying to capture this feeling that this is evening, that this wallaby is hopping out of the dark bush across this water, and maybe the moonlight is catching the glow of dusk, or the moon is just highlighting him. I didn't develop the water to a great extent. I've left the water very boldly painted. I've left the background trees, the bush, very abstractly painted because the focus is that main focal point. I wanted the eye to hit the main focal point. With both of these paintings, the wallaby, which I believe is a red-necked wallaby, if you're interested in what variety of wallaby it is, and the beautiful Eastern Rosella and the pear tree I did earlier, if you have a look at it, the composition is very similar. The head of the wallaby or the Eastern Rosella is off-centre. It's not too close to any of the sides, and it's not dead centre. Look at the difference before and after the glazing. The glazing made all the difference with this work. If I've helped you in any way, please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up, and hit the notification bell so you're notified of my next tutorial. And I'll be back.